This is Partner Relationship Management, the ultimate channel sales podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Channel Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Bird. Hyperscaler marketplaces are having a significant impact on channel sales. By providing customers with access to cloud-based services, hyperscaler marketplaces have become an increasingly popular way for customers to purchase IT services. And this has led to a shift away from traditional channel sales, as customers are now able to purchase what they need directly from the cloud provider. As a result, channel partners must focus on providing value-added services and support in order to remain competitive in the market. Our guest today has lived through the evolution of channel partnerships over the last 20 years. In that time, he's witnessed the revolutionary changes in the IT sector, from virtualization to the emergence and prevalence of hyperscalers, as he's worked his way up through the ranks from channel account manager to his role today as the Director of Partner Ecosystems for the Southeast in the world leader of enterprise open source solutions, Redhat. He's here with us today to talk about the effects of the hyperscaler marketplaces on channel sales and partner ecosystems. Please welcome Tim Lowe. Welcome to the show, Tim. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Paul. Looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about some of the highlights of your career in the channel space so far.
Yeah, so I've been at Redhat 16 years now. Started off as an inside sales rep and worked my way through different AE roles. Worked on the global channel team for a little while, and then got into our North America channel via distribution, and sort of worked my way up through there. Really, a lot of focus on distribution across all of our segments, and then focusing on mid-market, where I had a mid-market channel team for a few years. We really focused on sort of those lower enterprise style customers. And then to my role now for the past few years in the Southeast, running all of our partner ecosystem sales. So, hyperscalers, SIs, ISVs, your traditional VAR type partners. So it's been a great run. I think that when I started at Redhat, what can I say? We almost do more in a week now than we did in a quarter or even 6 months than when I started. So it's been a wild ride from a bunch of Red Hatters on a couple of floors in an office building at NC State to the company we are today.
Absolutely. You put up some pretty big numbers. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and those numbers are getting close or over $1 billion over your time with Redhat.
Yeah. We're a little bit over $5 billion in revenue now as a company. So we had great leadership throughout, from Jim to Paul, and now Matt Hicks, and we continue to stick to our core values and continue to have success.
So let's jump into today's discussion. For people that aren't familiar, who are these hyperscalers, and why do we call them that?
Sure. So your hyperscalers are your public cloud providers. So Amazon, Google, Microsoft Azure, IBM Cloud, Ali Cloud. What they're doing is they're providing infrastructure in an on-demand fashion at a massive scale. So versus having all of your infrastructure in a data center and having your own racks, these companies provide us to be able to go up and down as demand indicates, whether it's seasonal or just, frankly, even weekly demand. So, as an example, if a website where it's legal to make some wagers on the Super Bowl, for example, right, would obviously see an uptick this past week in the computing power and et cetera that they need. And so this allows customers customers, right, to be able to leverage the advantage of being able to scale up to meet that demand without having the actual hardware costs sitting there for an entire year.
Absolutely. That's interesting. So how do you think these hyperscalers and their marketplaces are starting to make a wave when it comes to the channel ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the traditional sort of route, and especially in terms of software, right? So we've been going this way a little bit for hardware. So it's not everyone's sort of settled in. They have some on-prem things, and they've leveraged hyperscalers for things. So the hardware side is pretty well, settled in. But on the software side, versus a traditional yearly license or subscription, in our case at Red Hat, customers want to be able to pay for what they're consuming, and they want that to be able to fluctuate as they consume more or consume less based on whatever their needs may be. And so your traditional ecosystem partner has to be able to pivot from selling those sort of yearly licenses, right, or annual subscriptions, to being able to work with customers and deliver what they need and when they need it via the hyperscalers, or they being sort of left out of that market and a customer just being able to go directly to a hyperscaler for that piece. So that's the disruption from an ecosystem perspective and sort of a traditional regional VAR perspective. They have to continue to find ways to add value to their customers in this new marketplace. And what I would just say is they've done it for the past 30 years. I have no doubt that they're going to continue to do it, but it certainly is a different way of thinking, and they do have to adapt, or they risk being sort of moved out from this new world.
So if you think about that kind of change that they need to make now to stay relevant, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities are with these emergence of hyperscalers and their marketplaces?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? And one of the things that we're really focused on here is co-creation. So what these traditional VARs need to do is take all of the knowledge that they have around their customer base, around multiple technologies, right, that actually solve a business problem for a customer, work closely with the vendor to help co-create solutions. So as an example, right, if you have a retail customer, and what they need to do is have a point of sale application that understands, everyone, when you go to the grocery store, right, you either swipe your little card or enter your phone number, right, so you can save 10 cents on a gallon of milk, right, whatever it may be. but they're taking that information, right, and that grocery store says, hey, Paul buys milk every 2 weeks. So we need to send Paul a coupon for an extra 10 cents off every other week to try to get him to come back in here, because when he does, looks like he buys a bunch of other stuff, right? He buys,
exactly,
hamburger meat, potato chips, etc. So all of that information has to be captured somewhere. You have to sort the data, right? You have to manage it with inventory, right? And shipping and supply chain. And so what the partners are doing today, the smart ones, are saying, hey, let's help build a point of sale application that leverages different technologies across different vendors and works with it on a hyperscaler to be able to go to a grocery store chain and say, you don't care what's on the back end, right? Whether it's this vendor versus that vendor, you just need to know that I need to send Paul a coupon every other week for milk, because when he comes in to buy milk, he buys $100 worth of other stuff. And they give them that consumable solution that they created with the vendor to be able to deploy on a hyperscaler, as opposed to having to go in and sell a customer a bunch of different piece parts. So I think that co-creation piece is really, really important and going to be what differentiates the partners of tomorrow versus maybe the partners of 5 years ago.
That's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people just about the kind of emergence of ecosystems and what that means as they make almost a paradigm shift. Not so much, but a lot of people consider it a paradigm shift. And one of the kind of focal points they have is this discussion about channel and, well, you called it co-creation. I've also heard people call it co-innovation. But that's probably the best answer that I have heard anyone share with me on what co-creation, what co-innovation would be, because that's a marked impact that it would have on a retail environment such as that. So great insight there. What about the overall effect? If people are now shifting, right? It's simply easier to go to a hyperscaler to get additional, technology requirements, as opposed to, as you were saying, basically having it sitting on the shelf so you can use it once a year for the Super Bowl. What other kind of effects on the channel do you think we're seeing as people now, they're no longer buying hardware and putting it on a rack in their office. They're now going to an Azure or a Google or an IBM cloud. Any other effects that you see on the channel with kind of this rapid adoption of hyperscalers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the best partners have always been services focused, right? They've always made the bulk of their money delivering services for these customers. But this has further sort of, escalated that to even or accelerated that, I guess I should say. So, you no longer have this big chunk of your base. Maybe it's a little bit lower margin, but you have a huge chunk of sort of stable revenue. The profit margin that's going to come from it, and then you can, iterate off of that. Well, that huge stable chunk of revenue is not necessarily as huge and stable as it used to be, given the emergence of these hyperscalers. So what that's doing is just accelerating a partner's need to truly dig in more and more with their customers and find out what are they trying to accomplish, right? What is the business outcome that they're trying to meet? And so whatever hyperscaler that may mean, whatever ISV application that may mean, whatever vendor containerization or automation or platforming that may mean, what are they actually trying to do? And so it's continuing to drive the very best partners closer and closer to the customers into the lines of business. Look, we've all heard it, right? Everyone is working with their sellers to say, hey, listen, we need to continue to build our relationships inside of the data center, but we also have to move to CMOs and CIOs. And I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to misrepresent it, but CMOs and CIOs are controlling more and more of the budget these days than in the past, more of the IT budget. And so it's just the strongest of our partners are continuing to move closer and closer to the business and the business leaders. Mm-hmm. It's a different sales motion, right? And sellers are having to evolve to be able to have those different sort of conversations. It's no longer bills of materials and feeds and speeds and feature function versus cost. It's, hey, you're trying to accomplish this, and if you don't do it every day that you don't, it costs your business X amount of dollars because your website's down and people can't go buy it. I mean, think of the times where you log on because you need to buy a new pair of shoes, right? Mm-hmm. If Nike.com is down or Foot Locker is down, you'll go to right? Or what pick your vendor of choice. You just need to buy a pair of shoes. And so exactly. Companies can't afford to not be available. Mm-hmm. And so you have to speak in those terms, though, with that customer versus, whatever piece of hardware you may or may not have sitting on a rack and whatever piece of software is running it. That's no longer the relevant conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. And those, figures when it comes to loss of potential revenue are going to resonate a lot more with a CIO and a CMO as opposed to somebody that is managing their IT department. So when in your kind of day-to-day interaction with your ecosystem, do you see a difference in, the traditional value-added reseller? And that's kind of a little bit of my background. I love the speeds and feeds conversation. I'm a geek that way. But do you see a difference between the type of relationships you would have between that traditional VAR as opposed to now more of a managed service provider? Do you differentiate the two in any way? And is there a future for both of them in an era where, we can work directly with the hyperscalers?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think that some of that story is yet to be written. In terms of the future for each. I will say that absolutely, we would work with a partner that is more focused on that managed service, right? And the ability to deliver what the customer needs anytime, anywhere. It's a different conversation versus a traditional VAR and the value that they bring. Now, both are critical to Redhat and vendors across the industry. But there's it's certainly a different conversation because you're interacting differently, right? And so, one of the things that we really stress at Redhat is, customer first, partner always. So we are hyper focused on our customers, period, full stop, right? However, partner always means there is always an ecosystem partner involved with our customers. It just may not be your traditional VAR resale. So what we're doing is making sure that we can shift our mindset and say there's a ton of value in our traditional channel, and we're going to continue to invest in that and continue to drive that. However, if a customer doesn't work in that traditional channel, it doesn't mean that the ecosystem is hands off. We still need to make sure that we are working with our partners, whether that's an SI, an ISV, a hyperscaler, et cetera, because those customers are relying on all these different parts of the ecosystem to go accomplish the goals that they need to accomplish. So all of that to say, again, I think that the future will tell us where exactly everyone sort of falls in these different spectrums. But you certainly have different conversations based on what that member of the ecosystem focuses on and wants to drive towards. But they're still both critically important from our perspective, and I think they will be for the foreseeable future. But we'll have to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years and how they evolve, right? And I think a lot of times those partners will evolve and sort of have a little bit of both, right? They'll serve customers in sort of a traditional way because, look, let's be honest, hardware is not going away, right? No. Traditional software licensing is not going away, and traditional services are not going away. There are just some things that are going to stay that way. So that's totally a ton of value there. But there's also the piece of, hey, I need help to migrate certain applications to the cloud. And how do I automate that? How do I containerize that? So I think that what you'll see is that the partners that thrive over the next 5 to 10 years are going to find the right balance between their traditional skill sets and how they serve those customers and being able to adapt to sort of some of these new modern routes.
Do you think there's going to be a new impact on the way that the ecosystem generates revenue? We know how the hyperscalers are generating that revenue, but what about the other members, the ISVs, the MSPs, the VARs? Do you think that there's more of a rev share model, or do you think it's more of kind of a service-based revenue model? Where do you think that next kind of 5 to 10 years will take us when it comes to the expectation of how they generate revenue?
Yeah, so it's absolutely going to change. I just don't believe that we are going to see as many large, upfront sort of opportunities. Now, that's not to say that the amount of revenue over the course of 3 years is any different. I just think that instead of getting a $3 million check today, you're going to get, and I'm not going to do the math, but whatever 3 million divided by 36 is, you're going to get that amount of a check each month, right? And so they have to be able to adapt to those instances, right? And one of the things I think that's really interesting is the committed spend aspect of these hyperscalers. So they go and talk to a customer and say, "Hey, Paul, you're going to spend $3 million over the next 3 years. That entitles you to X amount of discount, and how you consume that is completely up to you." So what partners are going to have to do is find a way to work with ISVs and SIs, right? And then traditional vendors such as a Redhat, say, hey, we need to get customer ABC to consume this compute on top of hyperscaler ABC, right? And the only way that we're going to do that is we have to put these vendors' technologies on there to help them consume this application, because that's going to drive the consumption, right, and burn down that spend. But oh, by the way, that's a really complicated process. Like, it seems pretty simple. Hey, you take your point of sale application and throw it onto the cloud. Well, it's not that way, right? It requires a lot of different work and governance and guidance, and that's where you work as closely with some of our GSIs, right, to say, hey, listen, we need to really re-architect what they're doing because it operates a little bit differently in the cloud than it would on-prem. And so all of those things together are absolutely a different revenue model, right? It's definitely more services based, and your sort of traditional, again, as we talked about before, your traditional hardware spend or software spend is going to be spread out, right? The hardware spend is going to change a little bit. Partners can still participate, by the way, just in consumption from the hyperscalers, right? Okay. It doesn't just have to be the software piece. So there's ways for partners to participate in that as well. But to your point, it's not an upfront sort of chunk. And so they're going to have to adjust their models and the way that they're going to market to be able to meet these customer demands of, hey, I no longer want to pay, this much upfront. I mean, think about, like your cable bill, right? I don't want to just pay for a year's worth of my cable subscription, right? Or my internet or my cell phone usage. I want to pay as I use it. And some months, if I go out of the country, I might shut my phone off. So maybe I'm not using as much. And so customers, I think that all of those things in sort of our consumer life that we've kind of been used to the past 5 years are starting to permeate their way into our business lives. And people say, well, wait a minute, this is how I do it every day. I want to consume technology this way from a business standpoint as well.
For sure, absolutely. So at Red Hat, as you're kind of leveraging different capabilities of the hyperscaler marketplace, what impact has that had on your overall channel strategy? In the 16 years that you've been with Red Hat, I mean, this is a time where so much has changed in the IT sector. What's the evolution when it comes to your strategy and now an ecosystem play as well?
Sure. So it's absolutely evolved. And we are working more closely to use exactly the words you did, more so with our entire ecosystem, and not focus so much on those value add, or not so much, excuse me, but not only on our value add resellers that are delivering the value that they deliver. We have to broaden our aperture and be sure that we are working with our value add reseller. But hey, what else are they touching? Right. These folks have been, they're small business owners, and they've survived all kinds of craziness, right? Virtualization was going to also put them all out of business, right? And it did, right? They're incredibly sharp individuals. And so they are working closely with hyperscalers and with ISVs and others. So it just broadens the lens and allows you to have a conversation and build a strategy with a lot of the partners that you've always worked with. But it's no longer a very narrow focus of, hey, how do we, how can you go sell some more Red Hat to this customer in this annual subscription? It is, what are we trying to solve for this customer? What other members of the ecosystem are we working with? And we build a broader solution for that customer. So it just really gets us a level deeper in terms of our strategy and how we go and have these conversations with these partners.
Have you faced any challenges as you've kind of gone through this evolution? And now with hyperscalers, any kind of pitfalls that you've had kind of experienced or lessons learned along the way, so to speak?
Yeah, certainly, right? There's always challenges when you're putting, when you're addressing a new market, a new model that's outside of your comfort zone. And so I think that, the biggest pitfall would be, don't go into this only focused on the way things have been. Right there now, institutional knowledge can't be understated, and success in this industry is incredibly important. So to go to someone and say, hey, forget everything that you've learned over the past 20 years is also a silly statement, right? But go into it with an open mind and say, hey, look, how can we leverage what you've learned over the past 20 years and then apply it to today's market and today's customer buying decision and buying process. So if you go into it with that open mind, right, which is, look, I've been at Red Hat 16 years, like open is in my blood, right? So, but go into it with a collaborative approach. I think that you can overcome a lot of the challenges because look, it's new, it's still new, right? We're still figuring out, how do you size out what you're going to consume over the next 3 years, right? How do we do that? How do we offer a commitment that everyone can be comfortable with the flexibility to change as needed? We're still working through a lot of those things, right? And there's a lot of customers that have a committed spend number with a hyperscaler, and they're trying to figure out, man, was this not enough? Or, oh my gosh, this was way too much. What do I do to make sure I get to where I need to be? So those things are still going to happen. And so my opinion on that would be go into it with an open mind, right? Because if you go into it incredibly prescriptive, that's probably a little bit of a pitfall. Like, I just don't know that we're in a prescriptive world anymore for a 3-year period. I mean, who knows? Like, there's going to be something that you'll talk about on this podcast in 3 years that we have no idea exists today, right? There's going to be a new technology. There's going to be a new process that businesses are trying to overcome. And so you have to be able to adapt. And so you have to, the days of building out, like, everybody does it, right? Everybody has their 5-year plan. Not really a 5-year plan anymore, in my opinion, right? You have a super skeleton outline, but you have to be able to adapt. So that would be one thing that I've noticed is going into it too sort of boxed into, this is what I'm going to do. This has always worked. I'm going to do these same things because it's been successful. That's where you could potentially trip up if you just don't allow yourself the ability to be a little bit flexible.
So, do you help partners you at Red Hat anyway, help partners differentiate from competition by leveraging the hyperscalers? Is that something that you currently do? Do you think that's something that all vendors in this space should be doing for their partners?
Yeah, listen, well, I don't want them to do it. I'm just kidding. But yes, absolutely, right? Yeah, absolutely. You have to leverage all the pieces of the ecosystem, right? Whether that's, again, ISVs, SIs, hyperscalers, and you have to work together. So, as an example, if a customer needs to consume X amount of dollars over the next year to hit a committed spend target, well, why wouldn't you go and talk to that customer, find out what they're trying to do, what applications they have that could be automated or containerized, right? And then go work with the appropriate ISVs. And in our case, Red Hat and our appropriate solutions that can help with that. And then his partner to help them migrate that and go back to that customer and say, hey, Paul, you have this X amount of dollars committed, right? We're all going to work together to help you get these workloads moved over. It's going to drive those consumption pieces, right? It's going to be, way more cost effective for you because you already have these dollars committed, and we're going to help you achieve a business need as opposed to going in there and selling you something, right? So it's a completely different conversation. In my opinion, if you're doing it right as a vendor to help customers achieve what they're trying to achieve by leveraging all different pieces of the ecosystem versus knocking on their door and putting up the slide with, these are the products we have. Do you have any problems that these can solve? Like, it's just it's a different world. If you're doing it right, then yes, vendors are absolutely helping coach and educate customers with different members of the ecosystem, and we're going in there together to present to that customer how we can help them achieve this, as opposed to going in there, you pass the guy on the way out, shake their hand, and tell them, oh, this is what we just talked about. Why don't you talk about this? You go in there as a team.
So I'm going to ask you to kind of have a crystal ball and start to look into the future of the hyperscalers. Where do you think they're going? What do you think the evolution of these marketplaces will be?
Yeah, if I knew for sure, I would be retired in 5 years, right? But I think that they're going to continue on the trajectory that they're on, right? I don't see anyone going back to a more locked in, sort of gated way of life. I mean, our whole lives are becoming more and more on demand, right? Again, in our personal lives. And, as kids that grow, my kids are only 10 and 12, right? But, 20-year-old kids that grew up in a technologies that never knew a world without a cell phone that was like a little mini computer are going to be the IT leaders and business leaders of the future, right? And so they're not going to go back to a world that they don't even know exists, where you had to pick up the phone and call somebody and then have to order hardware and then give you rights and all this stuff. Like, they only understand on demand, right? Google Docs or Office 365 and the like. That's the only world that they know. So that is going to cause, in my opinion, those hyperscalers to continue to grow at a really impressive rate. And I think that they're going to continue to work on security and ways to sort of gate and fence certain things to where customers are more comfortable putting more sensitive applications out into the cloud, right? To me, that's the big question. There are still some things that customers, whether it's regulatory, like from a federal level or whatnot, that they're like, hey, man, this isn't touching the outside world, right? This lives in our building. But, we also didn't think email would live outside our buildings 10 years ago. So who knows? So if, in my opinion, I think there are going to be more and more things that get moved out into these consumption on demand style hyperscalers. And they'll just continue to beef up what they're doing, which just goes to show that they're going to, continue to have to work with all sorts of ecosystem partners, the hyperscalers, to be able to deliver what their customers want. Because I just, again, I think that the world is continuing to be more and more on demand. The only other thing that I would say, and I'll perfectly honest, I don't have a ton of experience in this, but AI ML is probably the most interesting thing to keep an eye on. Chat GPT, right? I've seen funny things where so my wife is a teacher, and they literally had to have a meeting at her school that said, "Hey, here's how you check to see if a student wrote their paper with Chat GPT." And that's crazy. That's crazy to me. And so
Unreal.
The evolution of how that stuff works and in the cloud and that's going to be a really, really fascinating thing to watch over the next 5 years.
So as we start to wrap up and we look at, your vision for the future of hyperscalers, I agree with you completely. What do you think this will do as far as the future of partnerships? Do you think there'll be an effect on it? Do you think it'll just be more of the same, or do you think partnerships will change as well?
Yeah. So, and I'll admit that I'm coming from a biased point of view, but I truly believe that open source is the future of technology.
For sure.
It's just been proven, like the collaboration, the many eyes sharing information, positively correcting, offering ideas. I firmly believe that delivers a better software. I really, really do. And so I think that, the future of partners and ecosystems is going to have to be more collaborative, right? I feel that if you don't do that, you're going to put yourself in such a niche that you just can't, you're not going to be able to expand and grow, right? And you're just going to have to hold on for dear life to your really narrow set of customers or market share, because it's just not the way that, in my opinion, that the world is going, much less technology and customers. Everything is about collaboration, about sharing, meritocracy, let the best ideas win. And so, hey, man, who knows, again, Microsoft and Red Hat work phenomenally together. When I started at Red Hat, that was not the case. And so I think that that's going to continue to be the trend, is all of us in the technology industry from a vendor perspective, our job, and it goes back to what I said before, customer first, partner always. Right? Customer, you have to be hyper-focused on meeting your customers' needs. And to do that, we're going to all have to work together. So my opinion is absolutely that partnerships are going to continue to be, there's going to be way, way more co-opetition than there is your traditional, it's either us or them.
Absolutely. And that is great advice. And you've shared some great nuggets with us today. The co-creation, the collaboration, and co-opetition. Absolutely. All right, Tim, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, thank you for listening to the Ultimate Channel Sales Podcast. Please don't forget to join us next time. For more information, please visit channelsalespodcast.com. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode today, please leave us a 5-star rating. From the Apple Podcast app, just select our show, scroll down to the rating and review section, and click Write Review. And don't forget to share with your friends or professional network anyone who'd enjoy it. See you next time on the Ultimate Channel Sales Podcast.